NC pork, good for the plate, great for the state. Welcome back into Timeout, the Tobacco Road basketball show on the North Carolina Sports Network. It's all presented by NC Pork. I am Mike Waddell, and up and to my right, it is 3 decades of covering the ACC and the national game of college basketball, institutional memory, context, perspective. We get it all from our 2-time North Carolina Sportscaster of the Year, David Glenn. And up and to my left, he is a former Division I head coach, current analytics CEO of Layup, and a tournament prep lifer, Coach Kerry Keating. Gentlemen, let's get right into the action here. And first up, it was a great weekend of Big Four action with Duke, Wake, State, and Carolina all in action. Duke with the win over Clemson, 67-54. Wake Forest, 68-63 over the Trees of Stanford. Miami with a big come-from-behind win over NC State, 77-76. And North Carolina wins over Pitt, 79-65. And the headline there is one we'll talk about a little bit later. No Caleb Wilson, no Henry Veesaar, and the Tar Heels still look like themselves. But right now, it's time to start out this edition of Timeout with our pregame stretch. Quick hits from the experts here on the North Carolina Sports Network, brought to you by Organize for Success. And David, in 1 minute or less, hearing these quick hits, what's the biggest storyline in Division I college basketball right here as we hit mid-February?
To me, the biggest story is that in this first year of NCAA revenue sharing, we are realizing that the way to the top of the mountain is now a combination of 2 things, the old and the new. And the new is you better have a competitive basketball-specific budget, because that allows the coaches and now general managers to go out there and lure major college transfers, high school prospects, even some international players now with professional experience in their backgrounds. How do you lure them? In many cases with multi-million-dollar financial offers. Yes, in college basketball. But the old, of course, is the same things that have been in play for more than 100 years. You do need high-end talent, but you need good coaching. You need an intelligent, fit-oriented approach to recruiting. You need unselfish teamwork. You need positive chemistry. The best teams out there are doing it different ways, some with freshmen, some with transfers, some with international guys, or a blend of those 3 pipelines. But you better have the budget as a starting point, because we are in the first year of this brand new world.
Coach Keating?
Yeah, to echo David's sentiment there, I think roster management is the new X's and O's for obvious reasons. And the teams that we see now are now winning in February. They're not just talented, but they do have a certain amount of fit that's happening right now. And chemistry, and continuity, possession, discipline, those are separating contenders from pretenders as we start to watch these games bleed into March. And I'll throw a stat out for you and maybe a little tease for a team we're going to bring up later on in the show. Veteran-heavy teams in the top 50 in experience are showing a plus 4.2 advantage in late game turnover margin. And that's just in this month compared to the national average. And that's not luck. I think those are adults in the room handling pressure. And that's going to start showing up a lot more once March comes around, because March doesn't always reward the most talented roster. I think it's going to start rewarding the most composed one once we see these games take place in March.
Guys, today as we tackle this episode, our 10th of the season, in our first half, we're going to talk about Caleb Wilson's injury and what it means to Carolina's ceiling. In the second half, we're going to dive back into that initial question, the national contenders. Who's separated and who's under the radar right now that nobody wants to have in their bracket come March? In our overtime segment, we're going to ask, is March about stars? Or is it about adults? Is it the older teams that are going to take over March Madness coming up this March and April? If you enjoy smart, credible basketball conversation rooted here in the bold North State, link and subscribe to all of our NCSN social platforms. You can find us at the NC Sports Net. You can also visit us online at ncsportsnetwork.com for full shows and clips. So, gentlemen, let's get right to it. Our first half tonight is presented by Michael Berard and the Founders Group. You know them as Stiefel, and they've been with us since day one here on NCSN. And one guy that had been with North Carolina since day one of this 2025-26 season is Caleb Wilson. The guy from Georgia has been red hot this season. And for Carolina fans, they are a bit depressed right now because the timing of this mid-February injury for Caleb Wilson is really disrupting their plans. But here's the new layer after the weekend. Carolina's first game without Wilson and without Henry Veesaar. It wasn't a collapse. It was a big-time response by the boys in blue, 79-65. David Glenn, big picture. Does this Caleb Wilson injury have the dramatic effect that we all thought it was going to before they went into this game against Jeff Capel and the Panthers?
Yeah, I'll get to the bottom line very quickly and then work backward. Without Caleb Wilson, with all due respect to what just happened against Pitt, UNC is a middle-of-the-pack ACC team. Still an NCAA tournament team, but not really anything special. And that is not even just my opinion. That is what the numbers say. Caleb Wilson has been on the court this year. The Tar Heels, at their best, have been up there with Duke as the second or third best team in the conference this season. And not long ago, of course, they beat the Blue Devils head-to-head in a game where it was Caleb Wilson in that huge first half that he had that kept the Heels within striking distance of the Blue Devils. However, prior to Wilson's injury against Miami, during ACC competition, the Tar Heels had outscored their opponents by only 2 points when Wilson was getting a breather on the bench. That is pretty much the definition of mediocre if you're roughly even over that extended period of minutes. Carolina does have other very good players, especially the junior big man Henry Veesaar and the senior guard Seth Trimble. But without Wilson, they're just another good team. Definitely not a great team. That win over Pitt, it did showcase the Tar Heels' depth. Kudos to Jaron Stevenson, to Luka Bogovac, to Zayden High, and even others for stepping up against the Panthers. But just remember, Pitt might miss the ACC tournament because they're going to be so at or near the bottom of the ACC standings. So we have to be real. UNC's ceiling is nothing special by Carolina's standards, especially unless Caleb Wilson not only returns, but he returns at the All-American level that he has been showcasing all season.
Keats, take us inside the whiteboard, because replacing Caleb Wilson, who is likely a lottery pick, isn't just minutes, it's aggregate production, scoring, rebounding, versatility. How does Hubert Davis adjust the rotation, and what changes do you think that we'll see long-term as they head into this game on Tuesday night against the Wolfpack over in Raleigh?
Yeah, Mike, you mentioned the aggregate. It's really hard to just step up and singularly replace a guy averaging 19, 20 points a game and 9 or 10 rebounds. You can't do it with one player. Hubert's probably going to have to make a couple moves here, obviously personnel-wise, relying more on Stevenson and Bogovic. We all know Veesaar's got to go from 9, 10 boards to 11 or 12. The harder part really is philosophically, it's more of a rebounding by committee. It's in that aggregate that you mentioned. And maybe you shorten the rotation and you simplify some things. And obviously the rotation's already short enough with Caleb out of it, because you don't want to try to go find and replace those 20 points. I think you take the approach of trying to find 5 extra possessions. And those 5 extra possessions can add to 20 points if you take 10 away on defense and gain 10 on offense. And you have to find ways to do that in transition, offensive rebounds. And one thing that may give Carolina a little bit of hope here is the fact that they've done a fairly good job of taking care of the ball. Only 7 turnovers against Duke, I think 4 again against Pitt. It jumped to 13 against Miami, and you saw the result in a loss. I think ball security is one of the more underrated things about this Carolina team that's translating to wins. It becomes highlighted even more when Caleb's 20-9 or 20-10 are out of the lineup. Try to find those 5 extra possessions, turn them into those 20 points or somewhere near to that, and keep your turnover margin down so possession control, which has been your heartbeat, maintains itself. Tighten the rotation, give some confidence to Jaren and to Luka, and hope that your decision makers keep making the good decisions and that the turnover margin stays low.
David, Carolina has got a pretty good record right now. They're 20-5 overall, 8-4 in the ACC. They have a game coming up this week at NC State on Tuesday night, and then on Saturday, they're up at the Dome, at the JMA Wireless Dome, as it is now known, at Syracuse. So if Carolina split some games down the stretch, they may drop one or two. How is that going to impact their NCAA math when the seeds come out there on Selection Sunday?
This will be really interesting because the NCAA Tournament Selection Committee is supposed to factor injuries into how they view any team's body of work. And the Tar Heels will get some benefit of the doubt, I think, if they struggle against what is a difficult schedule here down the stretch. There's no more Notre Dames, no more Georgia Techs, no more Pitts. It's State, it's Syracuse, it's Duke, of course, in the season finale in Durham. It's also Louisville, Virginia Tech, and Clemson in Chapel Hill. There's not an easy one in that bunch. Since Wilson has already said publicly that he is going to return this season, the committee is going to watch how he looks if he comes back, let's say, at the very end of the regular season or just for the ACC tournament. Because if he looks 100%, and the Heels are getting back to winning with him, and maybe they lose several, as you mentioned, without him, that's when the committee would be the most likely to give the Tar Heels the benefit of the injury doubt, if you will, in the seeding process. But remember, if Wilson tries to come back early and he struggles, then the committee could keep UNC's seed lower. Why? Because the Tar Heels' big wins against Kansas and Duke and others came when Wilson was healthy, not when he was trying to battle through a significant hand injury. So the bottom line is, as we speak, it's too early to know for sure how the committee is going to view Carolina because we haven't seen enough of the Tar Heels without Wilson. Again, the Pitt win notwithstanding, they're going to place more weight on these games against tougher opponents. So we need to wait a while longer to see what's Wilson's health level and effectiveness level when he does return, because the committee is definitely going to put a lot of weight on that.
Keats, when you look at Carolina's performance against Pitt, I think a lot of people were expecting a little bit of a letdown. And that was just with Wilson on the shelf. Now you add Veesaar to being on the shelf as well. And people had to be over the moon leaving the Smith Center on Saturday afternoon because this was a great performance. Now, Pitt is also not that good of a team. If you're Hubert Davis, how do you maintain a steady level of confidence with this group and not let them get too high? Because the team they're playing on Tuesday night is a rival in NC State, and they're coming off a pretty nasty loss. And Will Wade was not shy in sharing his discontent with his Wolfies out there. But back to Hubert Davis, how does he keep his team very level-headed and not too big-headed as they go into this big matchup over at the Lenovo Center on Tuesday?
Well, I think you can combine the ability to go a little bit smaller now, maybe a little bit faster, while also expanding some roles that have to happen with the absence of Wilson, asking Veesaar and Stevenson to expand their roles a little bit more in half court. The big fella's got to become a little bit more reliable in the post in volume, but not just efficiency, right? He's going to get more touches, obviously, when you're taking the touches out of Wilson's hands. Steve Jaren's got to defend fours. He's shown an ability to draw some charges. He's got to block some shots and protect the rim a little bit to help keep Veesaar out of foul trouble, and he's got to stay out of foul trouble. It's asking a lot when your rotation shrinks and you're putting a lot on two guys instead of three in those two front court positions. But the other piece is really Dixon and Trimble now. They'll have an ability maybe to create a little bit more offense in isolation. Derek Dixon's confidence should be rising, obviously, on the heels of making some pretty good decisions lately and being thrust into a more reliable role by way of starting and making some plays at the end of games that matter. But the interesting thing is they said that Carolina leads the country in dunks. It takes me back to when Coach K started to invent that they led the country in charges. Like everybody's keeping track of all these things. So maybe they're doing it now more in dunks, and it's a little bit more easier to or simpler to track these type of stats with all the analytics and the video that we have. But when you do take that out, and yet we have watched them, and it's pretty credible that there were a lot of dunks coming by way of Caleb Wilson. You take that away, and now the half-court offense gets a little bit, I don't know, grindier. Maybe you've really got to grind out some possessions, which is why you need to get going up and down in transition. And if you're going to be a half-court grinded out team, that's okay if you're Houston, but you're not built that way at Carolina. So there's going to be a lot of re-roll definition here in the next 2 to 3 weeks as we hopefully wait for Caleb to come back. I'll add this. You're trying to create an identity when you go from February to March, and when you've removed the head of your snake, when you've removed Caleb Wilson, it's hard to really know who you are in February. Now all of a sudden he comes back in the lineup in March, and they've lost their identity piece. Will they get it back? Will they be able to find a new one, a temporary one, to bridge the gap before Caleb's come back? Because you can't really rebuild that identity now in practice this late. You already have to shorten that down by way of maintaining your health. They've probably got about 5, we were just talking pre-show, maybe 5 or 6 games to figure it out if they're lucky. And we don't even know if that first game back is going to be the Duke game or the first round of the ACC tournament, no matter where they find themselves in the bracket.
North Carolina right now 20-5 overall. They're 8-4 in the ACC, and their next opponent, their big rivals from Raleigh, NC State, is 18-8 overall and 9-4 in the ACC. So this game between the Pack and Heels really is going to do a lot to answer the question, which one of these teams, if either, is going to make the best run at getting one of those double buys in the ACC tournament. David Glenn for NC State, Will Wade in his first campaign with the Wolfpack. This team has been a little inconsistent, and that was not a game that was a very strong close for the Wolfpack, and you could certainly see Will's discontent when he was talking with the media, and I can't imagine that's gotten any less intense in his belly over the last 48 hours.
Yeah, it was a missed opportunity, right? They had that game almost in the bag, and it took an unusual sequence of events for them to let it get away against what is a quality Miami team. So it could have been a nice resume booster, and instead it's one where everybody's scratching their head asking how it got away. But they have to reevaluate that how it got away included failing to inbound the ball a couple of times properly in the final minute. It also included Darian Williams, a veteran player, losing his cool. It is not fun to be in the middle of a scrum when there's a loose ball and bodies are landing on you and elbows might hit you in an unpleasant place. But there were 4 players in that scrum, and 3 of the 4 kept their cool. And Darian Williams was the only one that had a dramatic leg kick to push a Miami player off of him when he didn't like when that Miami or how the Miami player fell onto him. What are the referees going to see when they go to the monitor? They're going to see 3 guys wrestling and curling and twisting and falling on each other, and they're going to see 1 guy with an obvious dramatic leg kick throwing the dude off of him. So who's going to get the technical foul? Who's going to get the free throws? We know how that story ended. I still think NC State has a great chance to bounce back against Carolina. And Mike, as I've been covering this league for a long time, this has been a hammer-nail relationship. UNC has been the hammer, and NC State has been the nail. If you go back, I think it's 40 games, it's 34 for Carolina and 6 for State. Roy Williams beat the Wolfpack like a drum during his tenure as the Tar Heels head coach. So I'm very familiar with the feeling of going into a Wolfpack Tar Heel matchup expecting Carolina to win, because that's what all of us have seen for the most part for multiple decades running at this point. I do not have that feeling this time, in part because of the absence of Caleb Wilson. You don't need us to figure that part out, but in part because State's offense is maybe the most diverse offense in the entire ACC. Other teams are more predictable when it comes to where they're going to get their points. With State, you're not sure if it's going to be Quadir Copeland. You're not sure if it's going to be Paul McNeil, one of the best three-point shooters in this league. You're not sure if it's going to be Darian Williams having a flashback to his all Big 10 or all Big 12 days with Texas Tech. You're not sure if it's going to be our NCSN partner, Van Allen Lubin, who I think on his best nights has looked like seriously an all ACC player with the increased playing time that Will Wade promised and has delivered to Van Allen during his time in a Wolfpack uniform after not playing as many minutes at Carolina and elsewhere. But even Matt Abel off the bench, a lot went wrong late against Miami, but the Wolfpack was still nose to nose against another NCAA caliber team. They just need to get better at the little things. They not only messed up those inbounds, they messed up the final possession to the point where Quadir Copeland's looking at Matt Abel saying, why didn't I get the ball the way that was drawn up? And I think Abel had a good excuse. Copeland was covered, but it was Abel, the freshman, who took the last shot, and obviously it didn't come close. So there were many things to second guess, and the Wolfpack has to realize that on the downside, they haven't been as good at some of those little things as others have been. On the upside, they're an incredibly difficult team to defend. And I don't think the Tar Heels, without Caleb Wilson, can match the offensive firepower of NC State if this game turns into a back and forth, up and down shootout at the Lenovo Center on Tuesday night.
David, you made some great points about Williams. He's really been an enigma for the Wolfpack. This is the preseason ACC Player of the Year, and his composure was not within his control on Saturday in that loss to the Canes. Keith, what do you say to the kid like that when you're trying to support him? Will Wade has already come to his defense a few times this year when the media seemingly was ready to take their shots at Darian Williams. How do you get him ready for the cauldron that he's going to encounter when the Tar Heels come into the Lenovo Center coming up this week?
If you got to get someone ready to play at Carolina Tar Heels if you're at State, you got bigger fish to fry. And even though this is his first rodeo through that, he's an experienced player, obviously having come from a very high level. And it does seem as far back as even when he was getting heavily criticized earlier in the season as the preseason player of the year and not living up to those expectations on the outside of the locker room walls, that Will was staunch about defending him and obviously the way that he affects winning. I don't think anything changes other than what the point David brought up, the seemingly out of character play that didn't affect winning, that actually affected the opposite in the last game. You got to make sure that all the things that are happening and have aggregated throughout the season aren't coming to some sort of head to force pressure on him. They've had a nice little run here, and you never really know what Will is saying privately to him, but I tend to think that his maturity and his ability to win in big situations in the past, and certainly now being counted to be that player here currently, I think that Will's counting on him to rise to the occasion. And they know it's a great opportunity. You can't always plan for it. I remember going through pregame preparation, and you get to game day and a kid gets sick or gets suspended. In this case, obviously now they're going to face Carolina without Caleb Wilson. And in some cases, the team plays better without their better player. It's one of those odd occurrences where you think, okay, you're going to have a better chance to win the game because Carolina's best player is out. I think if you're Will Wade, you need to make sure that what you have intact by way of Darian Williams shows up the way that they're needed to, and make sure that doesn't happen to them, because it's an unbelievable opportunity that now is magnified given the way that the Miami game unfolded and uncurled on them in a win that was basically just let go. So this is almost worth two right now, because Will wasn't too shy about pointing out, hey, tournament team, well, we lost to Georgia Tech. All due respect, like he's trying to keep it real, and in some ways too real. You don't want to give the committee any ammunition here. But I think if you're Will, you have to really pull Darian aside and make sure that he's ultimately focused on the task at hand, which is winning this next game that now carries a lot more weight given what happened against Miami.
Guys, you both know Roy Williams. The guy hates NC State, and there was never any doubt that the team, when he was coaching Carolina, knew that he hated NC State. Hubert Davis has been a part of this rivalry, and so has Seth Trimble, but nobody else on the Carolina roster has played significant minutes against the Wolfpack, and the same can be said for Will Wade's first edition of NC State basketball guys who've never played against Carolina. Now, you do have Vin Allen Lubin, who has played for both North Carolina and NC State, but in this era of NIL basketball, are these rivalries and all of this angst between the culture and agriculture crowd, is that more for the fans now than it really is for the players?
I think it is more for the fans, but I've been in all these buildings, and I can tell you that Wolfpack Nation is a little different when Carolina comes to town. And even though these college basketball players, especially the older guys, have been on the road and have had people harass them, there can be a next level to when the Tar Heels visit Raleigh. And I don't think it'll affect the older guys as much, but you never know how it's going to affect a younger guy. And let's face it, Carolina as a whole has not been great on the road, right? They go to Stanford, they lose. They go to California, they lose. They go to Miami, they lose. They went to SMU earlier this year, they lose. The best teams in the ACC right now, the very best teams, have been able to win home and away. And the Tar Heels, even with Caleb Wilson, were not great on the road. So with State needing this victory, with even the players, if they're not emotionally attached to some of the things that we follow, and Mike, in your case being a native North Carolinian, these young guys aren't as emotionally attached to those who have lived it and breathed it for decades, but they do understand how many of their fellow students feel. They are capable of seeing on social media the hatred between the fan bases, and it's just a guessing game. How do they react to that maybe self-imposed pressure? How do they react to maybe a next level of harassment where you might learn a few new words or experience a level of intensity from the fans in the front rows that either you've never seen at the college level or those moments have been few and far between?
Keats, tell me about all of your rivalry games that you've been a part of as an assistant coach, as a head coach. What's your most crazy story about what David was just talking about there, the impact of going into a hostile environment and trying to handle your emotions?
I'm trying to figure out which one actually affected the game because I don't have anything where it was so adverse. I do remember very early on when I was at Seton Hall, there was more of a rivalry between Seton Hall and Rutgers when Rutgers was actually in a geographically sensible conference and Seton Hall was obviously still in the Big East, thankfully still is. There's a lot of Jersey and tri-state area kids involved in those games. We actually had a game where a walk-on for us ended up playing and scoring the majority of the points in the end of the game. Those games present a lot of opportunities for a lot of crazy things to happen because the emotional part of it does get the best of some of those kids, especially now because in the regional games, in the games where there's proximity and distance and the rivalry is not just conference related, but maybe geographically related, these kids all grow up playing against each other, and they actually grow up playing against each other more in a spread geographical sense than ever because of the AU propensity. And they claim to know each other, but they really spend a lot of time with each other at these tournaments, and then obviously playing with each other, working out. So there's a little bit of an extra edge to that. There's always a little bit something extra when you win or lose those games. And the ones that can stay in character are the ones that really come out on top. But when you asked me that, I was thinking back to the UCLA-USC game, which is a big LA rivalry, right? The Vanderbilt-Tennessee game. There's some characters in those. It's funny because I think it affects more of those people that are diehard alums and fans of the teams than it actually does the players. And you always have they maybe take it a little because there's more depth to it. There's time put into that, right? Our older alums of these schools as opposed to the kids that are there. So it's always fun to see what those rivalry games produce. And more often than not, the good ones always produce something fun.
Obviously, with the Carolina NC State game coming up, we wanted to spend more time on that here in this Big Four segment that we do on Timeout, the Tobacco Road Basketball Show. But we'd be remiss if we didn't take a second to talk about Wake Forest and Duke. Now, Duke is atop the Atlantic Coast Conference right now. They're at 22-2 overall. And after that 3-point loss to Carolina back on February 7th, the Blue Devils have responded with wins by 16 over Pitt and by 13 over Clemson. And they're coming up this week, David, with a game against Syracuse, and then a big out-of-conference game with Michigan out of the Big Ten. So Duke's going to get some fun out-of-conference test here down the stretch. If you're Jon Scheyer right now, you got to feel really good about how your team responded to that disappointing loss and have come back strong, especially in that game against the Tigers.
Yeah, if I'm Jon Scheyer, I feel mostly good about my top 7 players. I'm a little worried about my lack of depth, even after the confidence I have in the top 7. I still want to see my point guards evolve. That's been a season-long theme, right? Caleb Foster is solid, but not great most nights. Caden Boozer is solid as a freshman point guard backup, but I don't think has really gotten a lot better during the course of his freshman season. A little, yes. A lot, not really. He's not a three-point shooter. He's not great at driving toward the basket. Caleb Foster is both hitting close to 40% on threes, and he has gotten better over his 3-year career with Duke at driving into the lane. So we'll see if Caden Boozer, the less famous brother of Cameron Boozer, can continue to improve. But I think Jon Scheyer also needs Pat Gongba to stay out of foul trouble. He needs Isaiah Evans to continue to get better as a sharpshooter on the wing. He needs Dame Sarr to continue to both apply his outstanding defense, but maybe get a little more productive on the offensive end of the floor. Right now, the 8th and 9th man at Duke are Nick Hemenia and Darren Harris. And from the outside, it just does not appear that Jon Scheyer has confidence in those guys when they get into a close game against a quality opponent. And quickly on that Michigan game, I'll actually be there when they host Syracuse. I don't think the Orange are going to give the Devils much of a problem. Just like I told you guys, Clemson was not going to threaten Duke. Tigers are an outstanding story. They simply do not have the offensive firepower to take on somebody like the Blue Devils. Michigan and Duke, guys, might be the 2 best teams in college basketball. If we made a list of the top 5, they're both in there. So you not only have former UNC point guard Elliot Cadeau playing against the Duke Blue Devils, his old rival when he was wearing a Carolina uniform, you have one of the better front courts in America, Cam Boozer plus Pat Gongba plus Malik Brown off the bench, going against a Michigan team, guys, where they're 3 big men who are sometimes in the lineup at the same time. The Michigan big men go 6'9", 240, 6'9", 250, and 7 foot plus 2 whatever. They're huge at Michigan. So Elliot Cadeau's out there as the undersized point guard. Every other guy on the court for the Wolverines is either a 6'5", 6'6" wing or a 6'9" to 7 foot plus big guy. And they're well coached. And Duke and Michigan are 2 of the only teams in the country that are both elite offensively and elite defensively. So when they get together on a neutral court, man, that's going to be as good a regular season matchup as we see all season. And it'll probably be a better litmus test than even an improved, we all agree, an improved ACC has to offer the Blue Devils this year. What the Wolverines present is a much closer test to what the Devils would end up facing maybe in the Elite 8 or the Final 4 if they get that far. Because as much as I respect Louisville or Virginia or State or Carolina, the 2nd, 3rd, 4th best teams in the ACC are not as good as the Michigan Wolverines.
Keith, if you're Dusty May at Michigan or if you're Jon Scheyer at Duke, are you pissed at your AD right now because you're having to play this game in the 3rd week in February?
Remember we talked about this a little bit last year when they played this game too, and they almost wanted to set it up as a postseason game to get a different look after going through the gauntlet of the ACC. And as David pointed out, it just so happens that this year they may be the 2 best. Now, statistically, right now, they are 1 and 2. And they're one of just a handful of teams that are elite, as David mentioned, offensively and defensively. I don't think you can lose either way in this game for what they've already both done to this point. I don't think losing this game on either side really hurts their seed, if you will. Certainly, they're going to strengthen each other's ability in the quad 1, whether it's a win or a loss, because that they're number 1 or 2. It can't get any higher than that. Obviously, if you're Duke, you beat 1. If Michigan, you lost to 2. So I don't know if it's something that you're upset about. You do somewhat still have an ability to make a decision if you want to play that game or not. And I remember John being asked about that this time last year, and he'll probably be asked about it again this year. But it may be a preview of what happens when we get to April in the Final Four, having these two teams play each other here in February.
Final stop here on Tobacco Road in the first half of Timeout, the Tobacco Road basketball show. We look in on Steve Forbes and the Wake Forest Demon Deacons. Now, this is an offense-first team. We talked about that throughout this season. They are not high on defense this year down in Demon Deacon land. And after losses to Louisville and NC State, they've come back strong with wins at Georgia Tech and against Stanford. This week they have Clemson and on the road at Virginia Tech. David Glenn, Wake Forest, if they're going to make the ACC tournament in Charlotte, they're going to have to get some wins down the stretch. Do you see Clemson and going on the road to Blacksburg as being two likely opportunities for wins for Juke Harris, who is leading the Deacs right now in both points and in rebounding?
I think Juke Harris is an all-ACC player. He'll be somewhere on my 15-man ballot for sure. He's one of the best sharpshooters and just elite scorers in this league this season, and deserves a lot of credit for going from 6 points per game role player to one of the dozen best players in the Atlantic Coast Conference. He doesn't get enough help most nights. And whereas I do believe Wake will be at the ACC tournament, I believe in an 18-team league, I don't believe the Deacs are one of the bottom three, which is how the new format is going to chop out the bottom three teams such that they're not even invited, for those who didn't know. I can see them beating Cal when Cal visits Winston-Salem. I can see them beating Syracuse when the Orange visit Winston-Salem. I can see them going to Boston College and beating the Eagles. So that's enough wins to get you into the ACC tournament. But the ones you mentioned this week are harder. Clemson plays elite defense for Brad Brownell this year. And unless Juke Harris gets more help offensively from somewhere, the Tigers are going to smother the Demon Deacons. Deacs are really tough at home, so that'll give them a boost. But even Virginia Tech, the Hokies, in my opinion, have more talent than the Demon Deacons do. It's not just the predictable Juke Harris. At Virginia Tech, you have to defend multiple guys. Toby Lawal is healthy again. He's a talented forward. Hansberry has been a very reliable big man for them this year. They have a European import. They're 6'9" point guard, basically, Avdalas. He's a dangerous player for them. Jaden Schutt, the former Duke player, is a good shooter for the Hokies. That offensive diversity is in place for Mike Young at Virginia Tech. Steve Forbes has had trouble finding it at Wake Forest. So good enough to make the ACC tournament, yes. Good enough to sweep Clemson and Virginia Tech this week? I don't think so.
Every great team has a winning playbook, and every great meal, it starts with North Carolina pork. Bacon for the early tip breakfast, pulled pork at the arena. That's how you win the day. Behind every bite, NC pig farmers fuel more than $10 billion in economic impact statewide. Great teams execute. Great meals deliver. North Carolina pork. Game on, grill on. Learn more at ncpork.org.
Michael Berard, Managing Director Investments with the Founders Group at Stifel, works with a select group of high net worth individuals and institutions to develop and implement investment plans tailored to their specific objectives and risk tolerances. If you are interested in highly personalized, well-researched guidance and outstanding personal service, you can contact Michael at 984-364-2002. That's 984-364-2002. Stifel Nicholas & Company Incorporated, member SIPC and NYSE.
Time now for our second half here on Timeout, the Tobacco Road basketball show. I am Mike Waddell with David Glenn and Coach Kerry Keating, and it's time for us to look at the national landscape of the game. It's presented by Excel Moving and Storage, and this season's national picture is volatile at the top and deep in the middle. Arizona's recent losses cracked open that number one spot, with Michigan, Houston, Duke, Iowa State all pressing the accelerator here at this point in the season. It is going to be a heck of a run down the regular season stretch and then on into March Madness. David, who has clearly separated themselves as a legitimate Final Four caliber program so far this season?
I see a pretty clear-cut top 10 and then an intriguing second tier, but that second tier, in my eyes, the teams there don't look like the teams in that top 10. And the only ACC team, by the way, that fits that description for me right now is Duke. From the Big Ten, you have Michigan and Purdue and Illinois. From the Big 12, you have Arizona and Houston and Iowa State. In the SEC, to me, it's really Florida and then everybody else. In the Big East, it's UConn and then everybody else. Then you have Gonzaga from outside the Power Five conferences. But I think in the ACC, it's Duke and then everybody else. And I do Louisville. I like Virginia. I like NC State. I like Carolina when the Tar Heels are healthy out of that second tier. But to me, it's the Blue Devils and those other 9 I mentioned that I see as a cut above everybody else as a legitimate Final Four contender.
Keats, who are your contenders to make it to the Final Four?
Yeah, Illinois is the lead offensively. They're a little bit on the struggle side defensively, but offensively, they're going to be able to put the ball in the basket. And oddly enough, Coach Brad Underwood has been okay with other teams taking a lot of threes, which is an odd stat in this day and age of a lot of kids being able to shoot threes. But they've overanalyzed the analytics, if you will, that they're going to be able to win games that way. And so far, it's proven to be true. That's a dangerous recipe when you get into the NCAA tournament if you get matched up on a one-and-done type situation with a team that's going to start making those threes, because as we know, it's really hard to do that 6 games in a row. We're probably going to get a preview of what could be a Final Four matchup, if not the national championship matchup, coming up with Michigan and Duke. Arizona, although fell twice this past week, the losing twice as a number 1 team in the country before they get fall out, not just once, but twice this past week, but still a very dangerous team. And I think that obviously David mentioned Houston. There's one team that I talked about a couple weeks ago that I need to catch up on and watch and see where they're at. But I know offensively have been unbelievably pleasing to watch and really good. And depending on where their roster is and where the injury lineup lines up, I still think a team like Nebraska can make a run to the Final Four. I think a team that's very offensively efficient can really make a run this year. And we might actually find this year, because I went back and looked at some stats to try to figure out which teams are really going to be able to step up and be the adult in the room. There's only one team in the country with an average experience of over 3 years. One, and it's Indiana. And I'm not saying Indiana is going to be that team. I'm saying that because the entire country is, quote unquote, young from experience. So which of those older players that you have can really step up and be adults in the room? And that's where I think some of those teams like a Purdue really are going to step up. I think Purdue and Nebraska are the dark horse. Like, Purdue's not as much of a dark horse, obviously being a preseason top 2 or 3 team, but having a point guard like Purdue has, I think, is going to travel really deep into March. So I like Nebraska as a sleeper pick, but I also like the traditional 5 or 6 teams that have the balance of top 10 offenses and defenses right now, which there are about a handful of, and we'll see how they shape up when we get through February.
David, historically, what profile gets underseeded and sometimes can be a problem when they get into that field of 68?
I think, Mike, most of the time it's teams that either got a lot better in January and February than they were earlier in the season. And that could be because someone who was injured previously got healthy. And that's not entirely baked into the full body of work, because what does it matter what that team did without this guy who's now back or now at full strength when he was half strength previously? At other times, it's when a key freshman or newcomer either wasn't ready or didn't get the system in November or December maybe even, and then they find a groove down the stretch. Again, the body of work for a team over 4 months can be misleading if that young player clicked or if that other guy got healthy. And then what really matters is how did they play after that guy clicked, after that guy got healthy. And to give 2 quick examples, Louisville in the ACC is a lot more dangerous right now with the freshman point guard Michael Brown Jr. playing like the NBA lottery pick that he was projected to be, rather than the way the Cardinals looked during that stretch when Brown was back with his back injury. or even at times when he struggled a little bit coming back from his back injury. When he's putting up 40 plus against the Wolfpack, Louisville is beating a really good NC State team by 40. That's not a slight difference. Another example, I think Virginia still has a chance to keep getting better because the Cavaliers' freshman point guard, Chance Mallory, who backs up a senior, Dallin Hall, I don't believe he has started a game yet this season. With each passing week, if I'm Ryan Odom, I'm giving Chance Mallory the backup more and more minutes because Hall, while a nice player, is only that. He's a nice, reliable, defense first, pass first guy. Chance Mallory, I'm telling you guys, out of all the freshmen that we enjoy, I'm not saying he's Cam Boozer, Caleb Wilson, of course, but holy cow, when you want intelligence, consistency, mental toughness, physical toughness, high basketball IQ, competitiveness, clutch play. This kid's the real deal. He's right there from the Charlottesville area. They've been watching him throughout his prep career. The point is, he's a better version of himself and keeps getting better. And I would think the coaching staff will just increase his role because he's already out there in the final minutes of close games. And I think it's real close to just giving him the keys to the car and saying, how far can the Cavaliers go now that the freshman isn't really a freshman anymore at the all-important point guard position?
In college sports, the teams that win aren't always the most talented. They're the most organized. They study the film, they build the game plan, and they execute with clarity and purpose. Your life works the same way. At Organize for Success, productivity expert Emily Parks helps busy leaders create championship-level systems for work, family, side projects, and everything in between. For more than a decade, she's coached clients to prioritize what matters most and eliminate the chaos that slows them down. If you're ready to run your life with the same precision as a top program, visit organizeforsuccess.com and set up your complimentary call. Organize for Success. Win the day.
Hey folks, David Glenn here from the North Carolina Sports Network. A longtime partner of mine, Sport Clips Haircuts, has a fantastic promotion going on right now, and I want you to know about it because there's only so much time for you to enter these sweepstakes. They call it the chance at a drive of a lifetime through its annual In the Driver's Seat sweepstakes. Each of the grand prize winners will receive this year an adrenaline-packed driving experience with a friend in an actual NASCAR car on an actual NASCAR track, plus $750 to have some fun with. You must enter prior to March 14th. You have to be 18 years old or older to get a chance to win. Again, it's at sportclips.com. There's a link there to the In the Driver's Seat sweepstakes. Also have additional information on the website about the official rules and privacy policy, etc. Sport Clips, by the way, does now have more than 70 locations here in the bold North State, spread amongst 44 different North Carolina cities and towns. Again, they partnered with JGR for the past 18 years. Here in 2026, Sport Clips is a family of drivers sponsor with Joe Gibbs Racing, a year-long associate sponsor of the number 11 Sport Clips Toyota Camry XSE. The Joe Gibbs Racing drivers this season are Denny Hamlin in his 21st season, Chase Briscoe, Christopher Bell, and Ty Gibbs. Sport Clips also, by the way, has a long-standing partnership with Darlington Raceway. Not a long trip for many in our multi-state audience here at the North Carolina Sports Network. They've served as the entitlement sponsor for the Sport Clips Haircuts VFW Help a Hero 200 race, which this year will be held at that legendary South Carolina track on March 21st. The earlier deadline, remember, March 14th. You have to get your entry into the sweepstakes on the books before then. Again, 18 or older for a chance to win. It is the drive of a lifetime. It is the In the Driver's Seat sweepstakes, sponsored by our good friends at Sport Clips and sportclips.com.
It's time now for our overtime segment here on Timeout, the Tobacco Road Basketball Show. I'm Mike Waddell, along with Coach Kerry Keating and David Glenn. And man, maturity matters at this point in the season. One of the most disappointing scenes that I've seen in college basketball all season long took place at Providence this past weekend, where Providence and St. John's were playing. The Johnnies are red hot. They've won 11 straight. They look to be the runaway best team in the Big East. They could be a contender for the Final Four under Coach Rick Pitino. But in their game on Valentine's Day, it was not all sunshine and rainbows. 6 guys get ejected. And Keats, there were some nasty fouls coming from the Friars. And Coach Kim Inglis looked really upset at his own team. He was almost embarrassed when he was walking off the court after one of those hard fouls. When you're a head coach and you see your team doing things that are just outside of their mind, how do you control and keep your emotions in check when having to deal with your kids who are not showing the maturity of doing that for themselves?
Well, it's a lot harder now than it ever was before because you don't really have a lot of time to build a relationship with them to know what's going on in between their ears a lot of times. This is a byproduct of making potentially, and I'm not saying this is the case necessarily with Providence, but you're making split, rash decisions based on finances and a transfer market that's not proven and not evaluated properly. You're filling rosters to make ends meet, and you're throwing talent out there almost haphazardly. And as I mentioned earlier on, sometimes these kids know each other from other places. You've got guys that have been at 3 or 4 other places that some point or another are going to cross paths someplace else in an adversarial way. It's even harder now, I would think, to have a real grasp on that than it was before because you really don't have a true feel or true relationship as you might have having developed that over time in your recruiting process when it's shrunk down to 1 or 2 phone calls or a direct message or a text message or a call to an agent to try to get you to come play and fill a roster need. I don't think, unfortunately, it's the last time we're going to see that. Now, maybe not to the extent that 6 or 7 guys get thrown out of a game when it comes to blows, but I don't think we've seen the last of that yet. As the stakes get jacked up a little bit more as we get closer to March for some of these coaches and turning these guys loose a little bit. And then some of these guys also are in a position where maybe their team's not going to play in postseason. And there's going to be some of the selfish attributes that come in that they're trying to show out for themselves to put themselves in a better position in the portal to go someplace else. So it's a convergence of a lot of bad things that can come together at once that can lead to a lot of headaches for a coach that, quite honestly, I'm glad I don't have to deal with right now.
Well, one of the things that I always talk with you guys about is about how to raise a son. David, you have Anthony. Kerry, you have a pair of boys. I have my son, Drew, who's 28 and just got married. And you never stop being a father to your own kids. And one of the things I say to Drew all the time, if he gets a little competitive with me, I say, boy, old age and treachery is going to trump that talent and youthful exuberance every single time. But I have to put it back to you, David Glenn. If you're a coach in March Madness, would you rather have that young, inexperienced, but talented team? Or would you rather have a roster full of cagey veterans on your sideline?
Yeah, the way you just asked that question, I would lean toward experience, but you know me, man. Like early in my career, I wrote the encyclopedia of the relationship between winning a national championship at the college level and the necessity of having NBA caliber talent on your roster to get that done. And here's what I mean by that. The starting point of an NCAA champion has been NBA level players for our entire lifetimes. And in fact, there's a stat that I throw out there that people have to look up because they think I'm lying or exaggerating. But every NCAA champion in our lifetimes, or even going all the way back to the creation of the NBA draft in the 1940s, every college champion has had at least one top 30 draft pick on its roster at the time it won it all. And in today's vernacular, obviously, a top 30 draft pick means a first-round draft pick. Most of those NCAA champions had multiple first-round and future first-round NBA draft picks. So whether you're thinking of some star-studded Duke team or Dean Smith having Michael Jordan and James Worthy and Sam Perkins in his starting lineup when he wins it all way back in 1982, it's even teams that you might surprise you more. When the most recent ACC championship happened, under Virginia's Tony Bennett back in 2019. Even he had 2 future first-round NBA draft picks and 6 future NBA players. So it was DeAndre Hunter and Ty Jerome, both ended up being first-rounders, but also Kyle Guy, Mamadi Diakite, Braxton Key, Jay Huff. They all played at least some, and a lot of those guys more than just some, in the NBA. So that's a heck of a professional level talent base when little old UVA, under unconventional, slow tempo coach Tony Bennett, even they had a bunch of future NBA talent. Roy Williams, 2009, Coach K, 22, back-to-back, 2010, Coach K. Each of those 2 teams from our backyard that won the NCAA title had 7 each players that went on to play in the NBA. And in both cases, there were multiple first-round draft picks on those national title teams. So I love experience. I love maturity. I love the higher basketball IQ that usually comes with the wisdom of being around the block 4 or 5 or 6 times. But man, I think you have to start with NBA caliber talent, because if you don't, that experience stuff just doesn't matter.
Kerry, Ken Palm's experience metric this year is seasons played against minutes weighted. And wouldn't you know it, that the Indiana Hoosiers, just like in football season, are the nation's most experienced basketball team. If you're Darian DeVries, are you approaching how you coach your team differently than, say, maybe John Shire is with his young Blue Devils club?
He's got the most experienced player on his team that he's known since birth in his son. So I think he's got a little bit of an advantage on that one. It's hard to tell. It's hard to tell what experience is really going to translate to in the postseason. And I'll say this, trying to figure out right now who's separating themselves from their conference based on that, and whether it's experience or doing things that experienced players would normally do. Acting like adults, playing with ball security, defensively rebounding, making good decisions in the half court. Now, I went through it, and Mike, there's 4, maybe let's say 6 teams going into tonight with a chance to be a 7th with a game on the horizon in the Missouri Valley with Belmont. There's only 6 teams with 24 wins right now, and there's one team that's 2 possessions away from having the most wins in the entire country at 26-2, and sitting at 24-4 right now with a huge game looming on Saturday in a rematch of an earlier loss against Winthrop is High Point. And this is going to really make our counterpart David Glenn happy when I say that I think there's going to be 3 bold North State teams, High Point being one of them, one of their losses coming to my good friend Appalachian State's Dustin Kern's team, and UNC Wilmington representing the state in the NCAA tournament. I think those teams right now, and Wilmington with 22 wins, but High Point with 24 wins, is one of those teams that I think has experience in how they've built their program. They lost their coach to go be the coach in waiting at Creighton, left behind a blueprint that was picked up and carried forward right into right now is looking like a 25, 26, 27 win season. So experience, I think, really becomes relative to how you build your program now. We talked about this early on and how recruiting has gone by the way of just putting pieces together. We saw the adverse effect of that, obviously, in the Providence St. John's game. You mentioned Indiana being the only team in the country who has that metric above 3. When back in the day, you'd have almost 75% of the country that was really good, and that group being juniors and seniors. Now it's just teams that show up with guys that can play. Well, I'm excited to see what High Point can bring. They're one of the few teams, I think, that metrically measure out that you do not want to see when that bracket comes up in March. And I would venture to guess that Wilmington would be similar. And I think App State's going to fit that mold too if they're fortunate enough, and all of them are fortunate enough to get through their conference tournament. I think experience right now is relative to how it shows up on the floor in doing experienced things. Like NC State not doing experienced things and closing out a game at home against Miami, up 4, 30 seconds on the ball. I think there's a metric that needs to be developed of the actions of what experienced teams would do to actually win games, because that's the goal. Not just have the actual numbers based on how many games you've played, because I think that can be a relative, especially now with guys that are going to their 6th, 7th, in some cases 8th year and coming back from being pros and playing. So the experience metric, I think, is going to be a hard one to gauge. I think it'll be a lot easier to gauge by the results on the floor.
Mike, real quick, just that on what Coach Keating just said. I hope he's right. because I'm just enough of a geek to know what is the most teams the state of North Carolina has ever produced for a single NCAA tournament. The answer is 6. It has happened only 2 times ever. But in a hypothetical where, of course, Duke gets in, no doubter, let's say the Wolfpack and the Tar Heels are at large, which seems likely. In your hypothetical where UNC Wilmington and High Point and App State, they do play in one bid league, so they got to win their conference tournaments. But if all 3 pull that off, we're at 6. And that's assuming nobody else out there makes a run in their conference tournament, which an NC Central could in the MEAC or somebody else. All of us, I'm not speaking just for myself, we'd have a heck of a lot of fun on this show and otherwise. Heck, 5 from our state is a really good number. If we get to 6, I'll be doing backflips. And if somehow we get to 7, man, I don't know how I'm going to contain myself. We only have 18 Division I teams, right? I'd say, I just wrote an article about this. 9 of our 18 Division I men's basketball teams in the great state of North Carolina, 4 are in first place: Duke, Wilmington, High Point, App. And another 5 are at least in the upper tier of their league, like the Heels, like the Pack. That's a promising picture, man. It's mid-February, and half of our teams are still in the running. That's a pretty good place to be.
When you look at these mid-major programs, though, it's one thing for North Carolina, NC State, Duke, potentially Wake Forest. They can go out, they're going to spend a lot more money, and they're going to be able to buy a roster. But Keats, you were a mid-major head coach. David, you've been covering mid-major basketball along with the Big Four for over 40 years. When you look at the job that a guy like Flynn Clayman is doing at High Point, or Takeo Siddle at Wilmington, Dustin Kearns up at App State, these guys, that seems to be a little bit more impressive of an effort to pull off than if you're just going to McDonald's and picking up a big heap and helping of some McDonald's All-Americans on the sideline.
Because those guys are losing their best players every year. There's no continuity for those mid-major schools, and it's really difficult, not impossible, for them to keep their best players year in and year out, because those best players are now moving on to way greener pastures and real green, like real money. And it's really hard. And I think the best coaches have to accept the fact, and most of them do, they can't fault the players for that. But man, it puts a lot of pressure back onto those coaches to really get it right year in and year out, to have your program set up the right way. And I think it speaks volumes to guys that are able to do that consistently, like the teams here that are performing to that level here in the state of North Carolina. And sooner or later, what that's going to mean is those guys will probably not have those problems anymore. It means they're probably going to be able to move on and be on the other end of that, and now taking from where they used to be. So if you have a healthy respect for it, if you have a plan in place, obviously if you can coach a little bit too, which all those guys can, I think the results speak for themselves, and we're all rooting for them, obviously, to represent the state. And obviously the personal connections notwithstanding, it would be a lot of fun to see that have happen this year.
Hey, what's fun, Mike, is they do it in 3 different ways. At App State, it is defense first, man. They've got that hashtag take the stairs. They are the best defensive team in the Sun Belt Conference, period, under Dustin Kearns. And remember, he's had, I think 7 years to build a program in his image now. Similarly, Takeo Siddle, year 6 at UNC Wilmington. The way they do it is a little differently. It's more offense first, but they're great at hitting threes and they're great at defending threes. But they went out and replaced a big man who left in the transfer portal with a Virginia Tech transfer big guy who's probably going to be all CAA and is one of their best players as a first-year transfer with the Seahawks. And at High Point, whether it was Alan Huss these last 2 years or now Flynn Clayman, who, remember, was on Alan Huss's staff and got promoted from within, they are way into analytics. They would love Layup, Coach Keating's organization, because they have a really defined type of person and type of statistical profile that they look at and that they only share so much about, because it's at some point it becomes proprietary. But they are plugging dudes in to their way in a way that has produced the greatest stretch of High Point basketball in the history of that program. Not an exaggeration. They might win their regular season title for the 3rd year in a row, even through a coaching change. So Yeah, 3 great stories from outside the ACC here in our backyard, but 3 different ways to build that kind of excellence.
This is the North Carolina Sports Network. From the high country to the Outer Banks, on courts, fields, and fairways, we tell the stories of the bold North State. Follow us on social media at the NC Sportsnet. We're the exclusive home of The David Glenn Show, coach-driven analysis of football and basketball. A look at the past with This Was Then, Inside NIL with Court Vision, the North Carolina Sports Awards, aka the Pineys, and the Old North State Tailgate, where we are on the ground at North Carolina's top events. Our foundational partner is NC Pork, raising the bacon, raising the bar. Telling the stories of the bold North State. Experience matters. This is NCSN, the North Carolina Sports Network.